Countdown to Chicago. The Democratic National Convention begins tomorrow. A show of excited unity that will culminate with Vice President Kamala Harris officially accepting her party's nomination for president. The first black woman ever to reach such historic heights. But tomorrow night, Democrats will celebrate the man whose patriotism and personal sacrifice made this stunning political turnaround possible, President Joe Biden. I'll ask one of his closest confidants, Senator Chris Coons, national co-chair of the Harris-Walz campaign, what this week means to the party and the country. Reproductive rights. Americans do care about abortion access, and Democrats will surely put the issue front and center at the convention. Mini Timaraju of Reproductive Freedom for All joins me live from Chicago to explain why the issue will remain a losing one for Republicans. And Christians for Kamala, Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis will tell me how the faith community is rallying around the vice president and calling out the un-Christian behavior of Donald Trump. I'm Jonathan Capehart. This is The Sunday Show. "79 days. That's how far away we are from the November election. But history will be made this week. Tomorrow, the Democratic National Convention opens at the United Center in Chicago, setting the stage for Vice President Kamala Harris to become the first black woman and South Asian American to head a major party ticket. And when she does, Harris will achieve a goal first sought by the late Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, who in 1972 was the first black person ever to seek a major party nomination for president of the United States. Today, Harris and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and their spouses began their Road to Chicago bus tour in Western Pennsylvania, where Harris gave a preview of some of the themes we will likely hear from her when she formally accepts her party's nomination Thursday night.
You know, when you know what you stand for, you know what to fight for. When you stand for working people, you fight for working people. When you stand for freedom, whether it be to make decisions about your own body or love who you love, you fight for those things. When you believe in ending child poverty, you fight for that. When you believe in what we need to do to lift up the middle class, you fight for the middle class.
The theme of the convention, an update of Kamala's 2020 theme, is For the People, for the Future. And Harris, already riding a wave of enthusiasm, will roll into the convention with fresh momentum, provided by a brand new ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll released today. The survey shows her with a 4-point lead over Donald Trump in a national head-to-head matchup. That's within the margin of error, but still a significant boost from polls that showed President Biden and Donald Trump in a dead heat a little more than a month ago. Political conventions have long been pre-planned extravaganzas lacking in suspense. And this one will be no different. Earlier this month, not long after the change at the top of the ticket, Democratic delegates voted to make Vice President Harris the party's official nominee. But let me tell you, folks who are going to stay home are now making their way to Chicago to witness history. Or at least that's the hope. Everybody and their mama's trying to get the hottest ticket in the Windy City, a pass inside the hall. And whether they are inside the United Center or watching on television like most Americans will, they will see a showcase of some of the Democratic Party's biggest stars. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton takes the stage on Monday. President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama will speak on Tuesday. President Bill Clinton and Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi speak on Wednesday. But the spotlight tomorrow night, the convention's first night, will rightly belong to its keynote speaker, President Joseph R. Biden. And with First Lady Dr. Jill Biden introducing him, the president will get the tribute he deserves for his nearly half-century of public service from the assembled delegates and the nation. This historic moment we're in would not have happened without Joe Biden making the difficult decision to put his party and the country ahead of his own political career, to not seek re-election. Biden's confidence in and affection for Vice President Harris was on full display when the two appeared together at an event earlier this week.
Folks, I have an incredible partner. The progress we've made, she's going to make one hell of a president.
Expect more of this when the baton is passed from a truly extraordinary president to his successor in what will be a truly extraordinary week. Joining me now, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, co-chair of the Harris-Walz campaign. Senator Coons, as always, thank you for coming to the Sunday Show. You are coming to us live from inside the hall. Give us a vibe check.
The call is coming from inside the building, Jonathan. It's fantastic here. There are state delegations, state party chairs from all over the country. I just had a chance to catch up for a moment with Senator LaFonza Butler of California. We were sharing about just how excited we are for this week's convention here in Chicago.
You know, Senator Butler was on the show yesterday, so it's good to hear she got there. She got there safely. So as we know, President Biden is expected to forcefully argue the case for the Harris-Walz tickets, while also saying how he considers Donald Trump to still be a threat to democracy. What more do you expect to hear from the president? What more should we expect to hear from the president?
I think we're going to hear some of the same that we heard 4 years ago. Optimism, hope, a belief in us, a belief in democracy, and a sense that service, leadership, isn't about oneself. It's about all of us making progress together. Bluntly, I think President Biden just made one of the most selfless decisions of any elected official I've ever seen in choosing to step aside and let his trusted, valued vice president step forward as our standard bearer for this election. He always wanted to be a transition to the next generation of leadership. And now he has a chance tomorrow night to remind us where we were when he came in. The depths of a pandemic because of Donald Trump's bad mishandling of the public health crisis of the COVID pandemic. The depths of an economic collapse that was happening because of that pandemic. And after January 6th, an assault on our democracy. So when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took the oath of office just a few short years ago, we were in a bad, bad place. And today, everything is better because he and Kamala have led. They've reached across the aisle. They've passed an amazing range of legislation. Just this last week, they were celebrating the deep cuts to prescription drug prices that they've made possible. They're talking about the defense of freedom, both the freedom to marry and the freedom of reproductive choice that they've fought hard for. And they've talked about how they've restored bridges and broadband, manufacturing, and the strength of our American economy. There's a lot for Joe Biden to talk about, but more important than anything else is that he lays the groundwork for a strong and forceful convention that will remind the American people that Kamala Harris has been a central part of all the progress of the last 4 years and is perfectly positioned to be a great president with her vice president, Governor Tim Walz.
Well, you brought him up. So what do you make of Governor Walz?
I've known him for years. I have some friends from county government who were close to him before he ran for Congress. And I have a dear friend in the governor of Delaware who served with him in the House of Representatives. Everything I've heard about Tim Walz, Coach Walz, Sergeant Walz, Governor Walz, Congressman Walz, persuades me this is a guy with a great heart, someone who's rooted in the middle class, someone who's a good husband, a father, a patriot, and someone who's going to have Kamala Harris's back. Just as Joe Biden had Barack Obama's back, I think Tim Walz is going to be a loyal, hardworking, and capable vice president to Kamala Harris.
Senator Coons, let me get you on one more thing before I let you go. As you well know, there are thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters are expected to go to Chicago to have their voices heard. We know that there are more than 30 uncommitted delegates who will be inside the hall, inside the convention hall. How should the party respond if protests happen inside the convention hall?
Look, I think we need to be respectful of the rights of free speech, but we also need to have an orderly and positive and constructive convention. There's always protests at conventions. Jonathan, my first convention was in 1988, and I was a delegate here in Chicago in 1996. It's important that we respect folks' differences of opinion, but it's more important that we let the American people hear the vision that Tim Walz and Kamala Harris have for our country and our future. My hope is we can accomplish both.
One last question for you, Senator. Bring it back to President Biden, who will be speaking tomorrow. What kind of reception do you think he'll receive when he walks out on that stage that's behind you?
Jonathan, I am hoping that he will be treated to the longest, loudest, most loving and supportive round of applause that any sitting president has ever received at a convention hall in our country.
With that, we will leave it there. Senator Chris Coons for the great state of Delaware, coming to us from inside the United Center in Chicago, just on the eve of the Democratic National Convention. Thank you very much for coming back to the Sunday Show. And up next, or after the break, thousands are gathered along Michigan Avenue on the eve of the Democratic National Convention to rally for abortion rights. And you are looking at live pictures out of Chicago where activists are rallying in support of abortion rights ahead of tomorrow's start of the Democratic National Convention. Abortion will be on the ballot in at least 8 states in November, including Arizona and Missouri, which became the latest states this week to put the question before the voters. NBC's Maggie Vespa joins us now from Chicago. Maggie, how big is this march and what are they calling for?
So, Jonathan, from what we can tell, we're talking about several hundred to maybe 1,000 people. This, it's worth noting, is the first of 7 permitted marches permitted by the cities scheduled throughout the DNC. We also know of several that are unpermitted. So suffice it to say, it's just getting going. They're about to march here down Michigan Avenue. What they're demanding, frankly, it's a slew of things. This group is called Bodies Outside of Unjust Laws. They're demanding, they're protesting basically abortion rights. They're demanding abortion rights. They're demanding LGBTQ protections on a federal level. And they're also protesting the war in Gaza. I'm going to let our camera push in just a little bit so you can see kind of as they get going with their speakers up. You can see they have flags, signs, and it just speaks to, again, the list of causes that we're talking about in this first protest. They're just waiting a little bit to get going. Now, if I can swing you back over this way, I want to talk to you about the police presence here in Chicago, because that's obviously gotten a lot of attention. We're going to bring our camera this way, and if we can shoot just across Michigan Avenue, I want to show you the line of Chicago cops. And by the way, recently we had, until a few minutes ago, a line of bike cops. Oh, you can see them lined up here right along Michigan. Chicago cops being very clear that they will be the only ones out on patrol during the DNC. They say they do have other law enforcement agencies from across Illinois and from Milwaukee here guarding facilities, but they will be out here, CPD will be out here talking to protesters. In the meantime, we just spoke to, thank you, sir, we just spoke to a couple of protesters about their thoughts going into the DNC, especially with the vice president ascending to the top of the ticket. Here's part of what they had to say earlier. Take a listen.
We didn't have a choice. We didn't have a choice. Did you not notice? We didn't get to vote for her. She was just, Biden, step out, you're in. What are her credentials? Who nominated her? We didn't.
We have 2.5 months to use our voices. Our voices are our vote. Once we vote in November, it's over. We are owned by the military-industrial complex. 65% of your tax dollars goes to war, to destroy other lives, to suck everything that is needed out of the United States, and to destroy the planet. The greatest contributor to climate change is war.
Yeah, and that's been a consistent message, both from organizers of this march tonight as well as the coalition to march on the DNC. Jonathan, they're the ones planning what's expected to be the biggest march tomorrow. Those organizers are talking about up to 25,000 people descending on the city. So again, just to reiterate what I said at the top, it appears it's just getting going here in Chicago. I'll send it back to you.
All right, NBC's Maggie Vespa, thank you very much. Less than an hour ago, I spoke with Minnie Timaraju, president of Reproductive Freedom for All, about the issue of abortion rights at the Democratic National Convention. Minnie, welcome back to the Sunday Show.
Thanks for having me.
So Senator Lindsey Graham was on Meet the Press this morning responding to a question related to, Senator J.D. Vance saying that, abortion is not going to be a big deal. Listen to what he had to say.
He's our nominee. He believes the states' rights approach is the way to go. The platform I'm okay with. We'll continue to have this discussion, but we're not going to win or lose based on abortion. We're going to win or lose based on, can we change the policy trajectory of this country?
Minnie, is that true? Republicans are not going to win or lose based on abortion?
Yeah, it's false, and here's why. I mean, I think it's really interesting wishful thinking on the part of Senator Lindsey Graham, who frankly should know better. He's been the author of a really egregious abortion ban, a national abortion ban, for multiple cycles now. I mean, look, they hope it's not going to be the decisive issue, but they know it will be. I mean, a poll after poll, state after state, when abortion is on the ballot, abortion has been a winner for Democrats and for reproductive freedom champions. So they know it. They're trying to hide from it. They'll do anything they can to talk about anything else.
Right. They'll do anything to run away from it and hide from it. But it's going to be the issue of reproductive rights, reproductive freedom is going to be a big issue at the convention, if not a central issue at the convention. No?
Yeah, we absolutely believe so. I mean, look, you not only have a presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, with an incredible record of accomplishments in this area. She led the Biden-Harris administration response to Dobbs. She led the Gender Policy Council. She's been a leader on this issue her entire career. But then you add Governor Tim Walz, who in his own right is a distinguished leader on this issue. Minnesota was the first state to codify a right to abortion in their state post-Dobbs, and he's been out there talking about IVF from the perspective of a husband and a father. It's a really compelling ticket, and we know we're going to hear abortion storytellers and activists all week in and around the convention, in the hall, outside, doing trainings, and we're having an unprecedented number of delegates who care deeply about this issue and want to get engaged.
This week, we found out Missouri and Arizona became the latest states to add ballot initiatives to protect abortion. Do you think we will see more states follow suit?
Yeah, we're expecting a few more states to qualify with referendums on the ballot. And look, it's going to be really exciting to have these measures on ballots for folks to come out and support abortion access in their states. It's also going to be important for Democrats in those same states to make sure they're running on abortion very clearly and unequivocally. What we're finding in states that pass ballot measures on reproductive freedom is you need a strong state and local support. You need a legislature that's pro-reproductive freedom. You need AGs and governors who are pro-reproductive freedom to really preserve and expand on that right that's codified in those referendums. So it's up and down the ticket. The ballot measures are really, really critical, but they're just step one in a long fight to regain rights back in the states.
So on Wednesday night, the focus is going to be fight for our freedoms. That's the overarching focus of the speeches. What I'm wondering is, how can Democrats talk about abortion, talk about reproductive freedom in a way that resonates with voters? Because not everyone is comfortable with the issue. Not everyone is comfortable with the decisions that are being made. And yet what we've seen and what we have been discussing is that there are a lot of people, when given the chance to either codify access to reproductive health care, given the chance to vote for it, they've voted for it. So is this going to be as heavy a lift as some might think?
You know, I think we can't take anything for granted, right? We're in a five-alarm fire for reproductive rights in this country. But going back to your question about the message, reproductive freedom is a message that the majority of Americans can get behind. We've researched and polled on how best to talk about this issue. And we know the majority of Americans, that includes conservatives and independents, understand that abortion access is about a fundamental freedom to decide if, when, and how to have a family. And another way to talk about it, Jonathan, that all Americans resonate with is who should make those decisions. it shouldn't be politicians, right? It should be you and your family. Nobody is in favor of politicians being in the driver's seat and being the decision maker. Everybody wants that fundamental freedom. So freedom is the framework. It's the right message. It reaches the most Americans on this issue. No matter what their personal beliefs might be about the actual healthcare issue, they still want to have that freedom to make that decision for themselves.
And to amplify your point, Minnie, the Kaiser Family Foundation has a poll out. 74% think abortion should be legal, 74% oppose leaving it up to the states, and 70% support nationwide right to abortion. Minnie Timiraju, thank you very much, as always, for coming to the Sunday Show.
Thanks.
Up next, time for the sound off, and there's plenty to talk about this week, from Donald Trump's personal beauty contest to the latest cringy J.D. Vance to Tim Walz's white guy tacos. My all-star sound off panel will be with me after a break. Don't go anywhere. You are looking at a live picture of the Vice President of the United States and Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris there in Coraopolis, Pennsylvania, which is in western Pennsylvania, as part of the bus tour that she and her running mate, you see there, the man in the white hair, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. Standing next to him is his wife, and standing next to the governor, you can't see him, you see his shoulder, is the second gentleman of the United States, Doug Emhoff. They have been traveling by bus across Pennsylvania today, and then later today, definitely the vice president will fly to Chicago, where the Democratic National Convention will kick off and lead to 4 days leading up to her speech on Thursday. Let's have a listen.
I will not speak for him, but I will tell you that these conversations are ongoing and we are not giving up. And we are going to continue to work very hard on this. We got to get a ceasefire and we got to get those hostages out.
Thank you, President.
As you just heard, that was the vice president answering a question from someone, assuming a reporter, asking her about her views on a ceasefire, and I guess what she expects the president to say. She said she didn't want to get ahead of the president, but did reiterate the need for a ceasefire. It's time for the sound off. Here with me to discuss everything, Amisha Cross, Democratic strategist, Joe Walsh, former Republican member of Congress from Illinois and director of the Social Contract and a participant in the recent Republicans for Harris Zoom call, and James Pindell, political reporter at the Boston Globe. Oh boy, everybody, thank you very, very much for coming back to the Sunday Show. So I want to play the Republican vice presidential nominee, Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio. Just listen to what he had to say on Fox News today. We'll talk about it on the other side.
Giving Kamala Harris control over inflation policy, Shannon, it's like giving Jeffrey Epstein control over human trafficking policy. The American people are much smarter than that. They don't buy the idea that Kamala Harris represents a fresh start.
Joe? I don't know. Why is he mentioning Jeffrey Epstein when there are pictures of Donald Trump with Jeffrey Epstein?
Because, Jonathan, look, I don't get it, but it plays to their base. The J.D. Vance pick, Jonathan, doesn't make sense. Why did Trump pick him? Because he's playing just to the base. They're nothing but cruel. They do nothing but insult the Democratic ticket. It's like J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are not trying to reach any voters outside of their base, and they're going to keep it up.
Yeah, and Amisha, I mean, just as a Democratic strategist, were you doing a little dance in your chair when you hear him bring up Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah, it's tone deaf. I mean, Donald Trump has more flyer miles on Jeffrey Epstein's planes than I do on United. So I'm very confused as to why he would bring it up. He's running alongside a guy who is already a convicted, he's already been adjudicated for being a sexual predator, up to and including rape. And this is also someone who we've seen multiple women come out over 32 at this point who have accused him of it credibly, including one that was a teenager. So I don't know why there is any reason to bring this up again, because it only falls on, okay, well, J.D. Vance is weird in and of himself, but you're also running against somebody who is known to be flying on this guy's planes and known to have enjoyed that island just a little too much.
I'm just wondering, James, why didn't the Republican vice presidential nominee argue on the substance? It's not like there weren't umpteen 5011 columns and stories written about Vice President Harris's, trying to reduce the cost of living for Americans. Why? James, is he a serious vice presidential nominee? It just seems like he's real green.
Well, look, this is obviously a planned line. If this is the planned line he's going to be doing in the vice presidential debate, then I'm looking forward to the report from Walt saying, well, then it's like having a convicted felon be elected president and run the Justice Department. But let's look at the underlying thing he just said, because the interesting poll out just today shows something very fascinating about it. Number one, while a lot of Americans are concerned about inflation and on prices, and that's why you're seeing both candidates talk about that, particularly Kamala Harris on Friday, rolling out an entire plan on it. They do blame Biden for it, but they are not blaming Kamala Harris. Only about half who blame Biden say also that Kamala Harris is part of the administration. So this is a line I'm not blaming Republicans for trying to build up, but currently it is not landing.
Joe, they are both Donald Trump and Senator Vance they're flailing. They're trying out all these lines. Are they going for punchlines because they don't have policies?
Jonathan, in J.D. Vance's defense, look at who's at the top of his ticket. Donald Trump is still running against Joe Biden, or desperately still wants to run against Joe Biden. So J.D. Vance is out there on his own. I don't think he's ready for prime time. Look at Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. They campaign together. They love to be together. They are a ticket. Boy, if you're J.D. Vance, man, you're out there on your own. You're getting no help from the guy above you. None.
I want to maybe... Can we play?
Jonathan, to that point that Joe is saying is that, remember, just a week ago, we had this report that Donald Trump was saying in private calls to fundraisers that when Democrats were calling the ticket weird, they weren't talking about him. They were talking about J.D. Vance. He wasn't giving him any cover at all.
Right. So actually, I'm glad you jumped in there, James, because this gives me the opportunity, sets up even more beautifully. Go to Element 1, where there you have Donald Trump in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and what he had to say about the vice president.
I am much better looking than her. I think I'm much better. Much better. I'm a better looking person than Kamala.
Amisha?
I mean, I don't know how we got there. I don't think that anyone would ever, put them in a beauty contest together and he would edge her out in any type of way. But I also think that this is the same guy who was, a week ago when she had this glossy magazine cover talking about how attractive she was. It got weird then and it's getting weirder now. He cannot talk about policy because he cannot believe, one, that he's running against a woman in general, two, that he's running against a woman of color, and that she is whooping his tail everywhere. This is competitive. He cannot handle it. So if he's not attacking her, trying to figure out what race she is, then he's also saying, okay, well, I'm more attractive than her. All of us have eyes. We need that man to either put up or shut up. And at this point, shutting up is his best option.
And he is never going to do it. More with Amisha, Joe, and James, my sign-off panel after the break. You're watching The Sunday Show on MSNBC. Back with me now, Amisha Cross, Joe Walsh, and James Pindell. So, James, listen to Senator Lindsey Graham on Meet the Press today. A very interesting thing he had to say about Donald Trump. Listen to this.
President Trump can win this election. His policies are good for America, and if you have a policy debate for president, he wins. Donald Trump, the the provocateur, the showman, may not win this election. That's what I would focus on. Policy. Policy is the key to the White House.
And so, James, I bring that up because that's like one of the first times I've ever heard anyone, certainly Lindsey Graham, admitting that Donald Trump could lose, especially since all we are seeing is the provocateur, the showman. He ain't interested in policy at all.
Well, Jonathan, I'm not sure where you picked up that clip from 2016, because the Republicans have been saying the same thing about Donald Trump every single time, every single cycle. And you're hearing it now from the folks who are running his campaign. Look, there are two types of campaigns in this Trump campaign right now. The campaign itself, the one that's actually running and having staff on the ground and running ads. This is one of the most disciplined campaigns in American history. It's really good. And then you have the candidate, which is doing everything to not be aligned with that campaign. So what Lindsey Graham is saying is actually what every Republican I talk to is saying privately, and they're very concerned about it. And look, Donald Trump, the moment that campaign turned around in 2016, to go back to that history, obviously there was the Comey press conference. But second, Donald Trump shut up. And that was really key. Hasn't really done it much since. But those final weeks of the 2016 campaign, when he actually shut up, is when he was when he was bolded up to victory. And when he didn't shut up in 2020, kept talking again and again about things that they're crazy about COVID. Obviously, they'll let him to lose.
Joe, listen to Senator Vance. Another thing he said on Fox News Sunday about the vice president's polling numbers. Watch this. We'll talk about it on the other side.
What we have certainly seen is that Kamala Harris got a bit of a sugar high a couple of weeks ago. But what we've actually seen from our own internal data, Shannon, is that Kamala Harris has already leveled off.
Joe, she's already leveled off, and yet ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll out today says in a head-to-head matchup, you see it right there. Vice President Harris, 49, Donald Trump, 45. That is within the margin of error, but that's not leveling off.
Not at all. That's a bunch of BS, and J.D. Vance knows it. But, Jonathan, I got to go back to what Lindsey Graham said, because as a former Republican, this just pisses me off. I mean, for 10 years, all of my former colleagues have known exactly who Donald Trump is. None of them, or I should say very few of them, have had the guts and the decency to publicly call him out. So now they're at the point where they're begging him instead of calling him out for the horrible human being he is. Look, this is a ship. Lindsey Graham's on the ship, Jonathan. They're all going down with him, and so now they're just pleading. It's beyond pathetic.
Amisha, let me get you in on the sugar high thing and how she's leveling off.
Well, I think the congressman was right, first and foremost, but there is a hope and a prayer that the Republicans have right now and that Donald Trump has, that the momentum that Kamala Harris is experiencing on the campaign trail, that her and Waltz, the magic of that combination will go away. They're hoping that it subsides. They're hoping that these individuals who they brought into the tent, when we're talking about evangelicals for Harris, that is something that we have not seen. That's something the Democratic Party did not even think about seeing for a long time. We've seen there's a white man for Harris. These calls have been going out. They're peeling off the groups that were consequentially seen as Republican groups. A few months ago, Georgia was not in play. It was already resounded that, Biden probably was not going to win that state. Now we're seeing an entirely different map and a clear path for Kamala Harris. That doesn't mean that she still doesn't have to push go and do all the work, but it does mean that they're in a real race. There is massive competition. Republicans have not expanded their base, and honestly, they haven't tried. But I think it's problematic to hear from the senator to argue that Donald Trump, all he has to do is focus on policy. He's never focused on policy. He didn't do it in 2016. He's not going to do it now. The only reason he got into the race in 2016 was because he was so pissed off that America had the nerve to elect a black male president. America's about to have that same nerve to elect a black woman.
Yes, Joe.
I was just going to say quickly to that point, we had 70,000 Republicans for Harris on a phone call this past week. Over 70,000 of us. They're panicking.
And we're going to talk to Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis in a minute about the Christians for Christians for Kamala. But to your point, Joe, about Trump being a horrible person, I want to close out by playing Senator Tammy Duckworth today on ABC's This Week, reacting to Trump denigrating soldiers who got the Medal of Honor or Medal of Freedom.
Amen.
Thanks for joining.
Well, American voters have a chance to choose. Do they want a 5-time draft dodger who denigrates military men and women and our veterans and calls us suckers and losers? Who doesn't want to have his picture taken with amputee veterans of various conflicts to be the next commander-in-chief? Or are you going to have Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who care deeply about veterans? Donald Trump is despicable. He doesn't deserve to be commander-in-chief.
And Senator Tammy Duckworth is getting that last word. Amisha Cross, former Congressman Joe Walsh, James Pindell, thank you all very much for coming back to the Sunday Show. And coming up, why the Harris-Walz ticket is gaining support from a new and surprising group, one that you might think Trump had locked in. You're watching the Sunday Show here on MSNBC.
أهلا ومرحبا بكم مشاهدينا الكرام في كل مكان. أمسية رائعة هنا والطقس جميل جدا وكل شيء جاهز ويؤكد بأنها ستكون ليلة جميلة في هذا الملعب. وكما هي العادة سأكون معكم فارس عوض من كابينة التعليق. مباراة من مباريات ديفيجن راي.
يلا يا شباب لعب الركنية يلا يا شباب ما يزربش لينا ويلي
الكرة مع الرائع روبرتو كارلوس. تدخل يحبس الأموال. المساحة الكبيرة لدى راميريز. برونو فرنانديز. كرة هدف في هذه اللحظات.
عبار
فالفيردي. لحظات وتنفذ رمية التماس. ديفيد بيكهام. تصل إلى محمد صلاح.
مع اللبس صلاح ما توقعتش يجري هذه اللعيبة.
برونو فرنانديز وصلت لفرنانديز تصدي بكل ثبات. يجب ابعاد الكرة في هذه اللحظات.
أي.
تنطلق المباراة مرة أخرى، النتيجة هدفين لهدف. ينكابي تدخل ناجح، قطع الكرة في هذه اللحظات. محمد صلاح، مرتدة ممكن أن تكون سريعة. ميرتنز، تدخل قوي في اللقطة. حارس المرمى الصاحي، والتسديدة أساسا كانت من مسافة بعيدة. تقدم ممتاز باتجاه المرمى. توقع سليم في قطع هذه الكرة. مرور رائع بالكرة، لكن خلاص كانت المساندة دفاعية وإنقاذ للموقف هنا. غياب للتغطية ومرور سهل. فالفيردي، مجهود طيب في الاحتفاظ بالكرة. برونو فرنانديز، تمركز كان خاطئ للمهاجم، وبالتالي حكم الراية يعلن عن وجود تسلل. كانتي، تدخل ممتاز لاستعادة الكرة. بيرباتوف، ميرتنز وفرصة هدف. تعادل في هذه اللحظات، عادت من البداية. كل شيء وارد، كل شيء ممكن، بإمكانك أن تتوقع درايف ميرتنز، اعتراض حاسم في توقيت مثالي يمنع الخطر. اوهو، ضغط متقدم وقطع الكرة. برافو التصدي من حارس المرمى. ركنية يلعبها فالفيردي، ينجح في التصدي. تدخل ويبعد الكرة، ملعوبة إلى مو صلاح. فورلان جاهز للكرة، كرة بتدخل، هذه كرة التقدم في النتيجة.
طلقت لواريتا.
العارضة تبعد الكرة من الدخول. فينيسيوس، تدخل خاطئ والقرار سيأتي باحتساب خطأ. تصويبة من مسافة بعيدة، شو اللي كان يفكر فيه في اللقطة الماضية. ينكابي، الحكم ينهي الشوط الأول والفريقان إلى غرف الملابس لالتقاط الأنفاس ثم للعودة مرة